Hello, this is Lauren Carr, and welcome to Authors on iTours, a podcast devoted to authors, book bloggers, and other book lovers alike. Hello, welcome back to Authors on iTours. Today we are interviewing the award-winning author Sarah V. Barnes, who is both a historian and a horsewoman, which she has combined into her debut novel, She Who Rides Horses, a saga of the ancient steppe, book 1, which tells the story of Nea, the first person to ride a horse. Sarah Barnes is both a historian and a horsewoman. When she is not writing stories, she practices and teaches riding as a meditative art. She also offers equine-facilitated coaching and wellness workshop. Sarah holds a Ph.D. in history from Northwestern University and has spent many years as a college professor before turning full-time to writing and writing. She has 2 grown daughters and lives with her husband, her dogs, and her horses near Boulder, Colorado. Be sure to visit her tour page on iReadBookTours to find links to her website and her social media platforms.
Sarah, how about if you tell us about She Who Rides Horses and how what inspired you to write this book? Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, the book itself is set in 4000 BCE on the steppes of what's now southern Russia. And it is the story of the first person to ride a horse. So my short description is that it's kind of Clan of the Cave Bear meets My Friend Flicka. And so I actually did not set out to write a novel. I have a background as a history professor, and I left that to follow a childhood passion with horses and became a riding instructor and teaching riding as a meditative art. And along the way, I also started working with Linda Kahonov, who is one of the founders of equine-facilitated therapy and coaching. And she offers many different kinds of workshops at her ranch south of Tucson, Arizona. And so I was attending one of her workshops, a writing workshop as opposed to riding horses. And the workshop was very focused on accessing intuition and creativity. And I went mostly because I just liked going to Linda's workshops and working with her and her horses. And so I thought maybe I would jumpstart a blog, but I had no great ambitions to write a novel. But on the 3rd day of the workshop, we'd been doing a lot of guided journey work and work with the horses. And she said at the end of the day, just go out and find a place to sit on the property. You don't have to leave at any particular time. We'll check back in the morning, stay as long as you want, and just write whatever comes to you. And she was going to turn the horses loose on the property and just let us create. And so I found a place to sit at one of the picnic tables and opened my laptop and poised my fingers over the keyboard and just started writing. And it was like this whole story started to download, and the sun or the moon came up behind the Santa Clarita Mountains. It was one of those big super moons, and I was writing away. And I finally went back to where I was staying and kept writing. And I came back the next morning and read what I'd written to the rest of the workshop participants. And it turned out to be the whole first chapter of this book. And Linda cried and she's like, oh my gosh, this is a novel. You need to write this story. And so that's how it all started. I really feel like it's not really my story. I'm sort of channeling it. And I did, as I had read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, about the creative process. And apparently this happens to to writers, where her theory is that there are these ideas out there waiting to manifest, waiting to be told, and they find someone who is open to telling that particular story. And I do have this combination of background as a academic historian and as a horse person. And so it is a story that I do feel equipped to tell, and I'm trying to be as accurate and authentic from a historical standpoint as I can be. But it also, the story has a life of its own. And for the first probably 6 months that I was writing, I would have that same experience where I would sit down at the keyboard and be sort of like, well, I wonder what's going to happen today. And I'd put in details, and 3 chapters later, I'd find out why they were important. And then I finally did step back and actually do quite a bit of research. And yeah, so that's the origins of the story. And it's not just about horses. It's about the human experience and how horses really changed the course of human civilization, arguably more than any sort of technological development that's occurred in the last 10,000 years. So there's a lot there beyond just the story of a girl and a horse.
Now, tell us about the girl. Is there anything of you in there, or do you feel that she's like the spirit that came to you while you were writing this?
A little bit of both. There's certainly some of me in there. I think that's true for authors with all their characters. There's some of me, there's some of my daughters, and same for the horses. They each have a personality, and I'm drawing on horses that I've known over the years. But she's a young woman, she's sort of 14 years old, so just kind of on the cusp of adulthood. She's a little bit different from her peers. She actually has red hair and blue eyes, both of which, now that just sort of came to me in telling the story, but then when I went back and did the research, actually the genes for those 2 characteristics were present in the population of people that probably were responsible for domesticating horses. But those characteristics set her apart from her peers. So she's a little bit of a outcast among her cousins. And she loves to be out in nature, and she's fascinated by animals, and her people hunt horses, but she really wants to form a connection and
now that would cause conflict if her people are finding that as horses as food, and she's talking about domesticating them,
right? And so that sets up, and she also starts to have these kind of mystical experiences around that desire, that sort of heart's desire. And that also is a potential source of conflict and danger for her. So that's a lot of what drives the story then, is how she has this idea, and how is that going to play out for her, and later on for her clan and her tribe.
So tell us a little bit more about the plot with She Who Rides Horses. So you have this girl who,
so she is sort of struck by this inspiration one day when she's out wandering the steppe by herself, because she doesn't fit in with her peers, and she sees this herd of horses, and one of them really stands out to her because it's a yearling filly. Stands out to her because whereas all the other horses in the herd have sort of dun-colored coats, sort of yellowy coats that help them disappear into the grasslands, this horse has more of a red or a chestnut coat, not unlike her own head of red hair. And so she's immediately sort of drawn to this filly, and she decides that she doesn't want to hunt it. She wants to actually run her hands through the horse's coat and feel what it's like to touch a living animal. And it's not just horses that she feels drawn to. She feels this connection with animals in general. And so she decides she's going to come back the next day with a rope to try to capture this filly. And so the next day she sets off with her rope and supplies to be gone for overnight, and an excuse for, you know, how she can not be, her absence won't be noticed. And she finds the herd again and falls asleep. And the next day she has a plan for how she's going to try to capture this horse. And then sometime during the night, she's not sure if she's dreaming or if she's awake, but she follows this trail that appears sort of in the moonlight and ends up down in this ravine, and there is the red filly, and she seems to have this conversation with the red filly, not through words, but she conceives the idea of not just touching the filly, but actually riding her. And the filly says, if that is truly your heart's desire, you must learn to make ties without the use of a rope and see with the eyes of your heart. And so then that's the task that carries forward into the story. How can she learn to see with the eyes of her heart? What does that mean? And how can she create ties without the use of a rope? Because if you think about it, these vast herds of wild horses, how would they have been domesticated? They needed to be able to graze and wander. It wasn't like there was baled hay to feed them, but they had to have some kind of connection with humans. They couldn't just keep them in corrals. They couldn't just keep them tied up. So there had to be some kind of a relationship there. And so then the rest of the first story, she gets the support of her grandmother about this quest. And then she's following the herd as her family starts their migration back to their winter encampment. And she gets separated, and two unknown strangers come upon her with the horses, and she's injured by them through a mistake. And so then she has to stay behind. Her mother ends up staying behind with her. And so then most of the book is the story of she and her mother and these two strangers. It's a father and a son, and then the horses, and how over the course of the winter they're able really to tame each other.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because a relationship, it would need to be mutually beneficial. And
Absolutely.
the horses would be able to, pull carts and
so what was in it for the horse, right?
Yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah. And that was my question too. As I thought about, why would, if this was a mutual endeavor, what was in it for the horses? And if we zoom back from a sort of evolutionary standpoint, what was in it for the horses was that if they had not become domesticated, they would have become extinct. But of course, the individual horses wouldn't have known that. It would have had to be something on an individual level. So what do humans offer to horses? They could protect them from predators. they could provide an additional, yes, most of their nutrition came from grazing the grasses of the steppe, but the humans also did some harvesting of wild grains and other food sources. So they could have been a source of additional nutrition. None of those things are probably enough by themselves to explain why horses would have sought out humans, but horses are very much social herd animals. That's how they survive. So they're wired for connection with each other. They're also very curious animals. And so even today, there are lots of examples of cross-species relationships between horses and goats, horses and cats. So it's entirely possible that a horse would have been intrigued by a human who wasn't threatening, but offered connection.
And that's why you picked a girl. That's why you picked a little girl, or about 14, a young girl.
Yeah, so it's really, and there are studies actually, there's a ethnobiologist, Joe Hutto, who's studied mule deer and how curious they can be and willing to create connection if they're in a place that feels safe. So there are other examples in other species as well, that it is possible that horses reached out to humans as much as humans reached out to horses.
Now, because we're talking about the clan and the cave bear, we're talking basically prehistoric time.
Yes. Yep.
How were you able to research that? How do you research something that's so far back?
In some ways, it's easier than a more contemporary historical novel, because the closer we get to the present, the more evidence there is to sift through. Whereas in the era that I'm working in, 6,000 years ago, there's an archaeological record, there's anthropological comparisons that you can make, there's historical linguistics that you can look at to understand sort of the cosmology. So I was researching in a number of different fields, and actually one of the most powerful is research that's being done on ancient DNA. And luckily, the studies that have come out even since I wrote the book reinforce the story that I'm telling, the location where horses were domesticated and the time period, all of which is not certain. The nice thing is that as a creative writer, as opposed to when I was doing academic research and writing, as an academic, you really have to stick to the evidence. And there's what happened in the past, and then there's what we can know about what happened in the past. And there's always going to be a gap. And as an academic, you need to stay on one side of that gap and really not go beyond the evidence that's available. But as a creative writer, I get to be in that gap. And that's really where the imagination comes in. And so I'm really enjoying writing as a creative fiction writer. And yes, I'm trying to be as accurate as it's possible, but in the end, this is a story. And if I can't,
it's a fictional story.
Yeah, if I can't find the answer to the details, it's okay to make it up, as long as I'm staying as much as possible.
You don't know that this girl actually existed.
Exactly.
You don't know if it was domesticated by a girl or if it was domesticated by, by a man or a grown man, or an old man.
But there is a you can make an argument that women were uniquely suited from a neurobiological standpoint to be involved in domestication. And I go into all the the role of the hormone oxytocin, and so I can make an argument for why I chose a young woman to be the one to approach horses from this relational standpoint. But yes, in the end, this is the story that wanted to be told.
Okay, so you had to do a lot of imagination, but there's a line you can't cross. That's the thing that you were talking about, is that you can because
we can't know, we can never
can't put wings on the
exactly
horses. You can't put wings on the horse.
Yeah, so this we are there are some mystical things that happen, but not so mystical that I would categorize the book as magical realism. But yes, it's meant to be as historically accurate as possible. And the advantage of working in a prehistorical period is actually that there's less material that I have to incorporate in order to stay within the evidence, because there's just so much that we don't know. So everything I've written is plausible, but
for example, we don't know exactly when horses became domesticated. So you were you able to use your imagination in setting the time period of
again, within several centuries, because actually DNA research was published in 2021 in Nature, which was able to trace the genome of domesticated horses back to a particular time and a particular place within several centuries or even a millennia. So and domestication was a process. It wasn't something that happened on a particular date, but through tracing mitochondrial DNA, they've been able to narrow it down, should we say. And luckily, that information, because it was building on publications that had already been produced, did was bolster and support the story that I was already telling.
So if domestication of horses is a process, then would have happened in one generation, like with your main character, or is that what you're doing with your book? Are you going to have a different character and have this be later with the second one, or in the trilogy, or are you following one character through?
At this point, I'm following one character, and I'm not planning to follow like James Michener and skip ahead generation after generation after generation. I'm investigating the initial stages of the process. So who came up with the idea of establishing a different relationship with these animals? And domestication, too, we have to recognize, is a two-way process. And there's a lot of research around that too. So it's not just humans deciding that they're going to take control over a particular species of animal. The animals have a choice in the matter as well. Otherwise, we'd be riding zebras.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So the horses made choices and had agency as well. So again, from an imaginative standpoint, what inspired people, a particular person, to want to come into a different kind of relationship with a particular horse, and what inspired that horse? So I'm distilling a larger process down to the level of an individual relationship.
Now, you said you set this in Russia. Why, why did you?
Well, again, that's all the evidence that we have indicates that happened, that process happened somewhere between the Don and Volga rivers in what is now southern Russia. So historically,
what evidence is
that's
that?
where it happened. There's evidence, there's archaeological evidence from burials that have been excavated. That DNA research tracks to that same location. So and then linguistically, so there's English is part of a language family called Indo-European, which is the largest language family in terms of number of speakers in the world. So most European languages and Spanish, English, German, Celtic languages, all and Indian languages, Sanskrit, all derive from what linguists call Proto-Indo-European. And so there's a debate in linguistics about where that who were the speakers of Proto-Indo-European. And there again, the homeland is fairly well agreed to be now this same area. And so you can trace back, were they using words around horses that would indicate that they were being ridden? So that's the kind of linguistic research. And then that language family, Proto-Indo-European, spread. Well, how did it spread? The fact that those speakers were actually riding horses and having carts pulled by horses and moving, that they were nomadic, helps to explain the spread of the language. So those are the kinds of threads you're teasing out.
Now in your research, because this is like prehistoric time, in your research, where was man in development then? Because you mentioned that she had a rope when she decided, okay, I'm going to try to catch this horse, and she actually went out with a rope. So they had ropes. Where were they where was man as far as tools? I mean, did they have carts? Did they have for lack of a better term, they weren't living in caves. We were past then.
We were past living in caves, but it's still the Neolithic. So still technically it's called the New Stone Age. So they were just starting to have maybe copper. Her people where she lived, they were just starting to have maybe copper ornaments, but no iron, no bronze. They wouldn't have been using metal tools, rather flint, obsidian, and stone. And her people were pastoralists. So they had cattle, sheep, and goats that they herded. The grandmother in the story came from a farming community based further to the west, and so there was agriculture at this point, but not among her people. They were herders, but also still quite dependent on hunting, gathering, fishing in particular, because again, these rivers, they did not have carts yet. That's actually one of the plot elements that may figure in the third book. That technology was starting to develop in the Near East at the time period, and would have spread to the area of southern Russia. And the wheel combined with the horse is what really sort of ignited a fully nomadic lifestyle for these people.
Mm-hmm.
But they had pottery, They had felting of wool. They were really fairly sophisticated, other than the introduction of metal implements and weapons.
I would imagine writing that would be rather challenging because, I even find sometimes whenever and I don't go back at all. I keep my writing in the present. But, but if you read a book, like if I read a book like from 20 years ago, what was it I was reading not too long ago? And I noticed that they didn't have cell phones,
Right, yeah.
So then you just instinctively, did you ever find yourself doing that, writing something? Wait a minute, did they have that back then?
I have to be careful in the words and metaphors I use, for example, for time, because we're so used to having divided time up into nanoseconds that we measure with these devices, watches, clocks. That would not have existed. So I had to debate for a long time, can I use the word month?
Yeah.
Month seemed to make sense because it's based on the cycle of the moon, which was the original clock, the original timekeeper. But week probably didn't make sense. Day, yes, because that's the sun. But the concept of a week.
But would they have used the word week? I mean, week,
exactly.
day.
Yeah.
How did you handle language and dialogue?
Yeah. So that's
English.
I use words. So I for my own sanity, I had to draw the line somewhere. I do use words from Proto-Indo-European, the language that's been reconstructed by paleolinguists. And so a lot of the names, for example, are drawn from the lexicon that's been created of Proto-Indo-European. But I'm an English speaker. I write in English. My characters speak English. We can imagine that they're speaking in this other language to each other. But for example, when they meet the strangers, they don't speak the same language. So then that's a challenge. How do they communicate? And then words, for example, describing the moon as having a silver glow. Well, they didn't really have, other civilizations had silver at that point, but they probably didn't, that per people. And so would they have thought of the moon as having a silverish glow? Probably not. So what's another way to describe the glow of the moon? So those are the kinds of things that I'm trying to keep in my mind, and figures of speech. Trying to keep it as believable as possible, that this is the way these people would have communicated with each other. That said, I don't think that humans have changed that much in the last 6,000 years in terms of our hopes, our fears, our ways of relating with each other. All those sort of cognitive capacities.
Yeah, I would have thought that would have been really challenging, trying to, communicate this story without while keeping it believable, without putting in too much of the common day, like I would not have thought about that. Can you have a week or a month? Would they have had that back then? That type of thing. And, so that'd be a real challenge. But, obviously now She Who Rides Horses has been successful because you have won some awards for your book.
I have. I've gotten some really supportive reviews. Yeah, from yes, it won the Best Indie Book Award for 2022 for historical fiction. So that was a huge honor. And it's also the Equus Film and Arts Fest Award winner historical fiction for 2022, and a few other smaller awards. So yeah, it's been great to get that recognition. What I really appreciate are the reader reviews and the support that I've had there. As I said, the biggest complaint seems to be that people want to know what happens next.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write She Who Rides Horse? Are you working on the second book already, or?
I am working on the second book. The first book was a slow process. So that workshop that I attended at Linda Kahanov's was in 2016. And at that point, I had a full-time training and lesson business going, and was also offering equine-facilitated coaching workshops. And so the book was being written in my spare time. And in 2020, when COVID hit, I was just about to the point where I could reach out to an editor and really think about trying to get it published. And while that was happening, I started writing the second book. So the second book has gone much more quickly because of all the changes that came with COVID in terms of my own business and how I was allocating my time. So now I'm at a place where I'm actually writing more or less full time. I still have my own horses and a few students, but I've spent more time. I spend more of my time working on the series now. So the first book took about 4 years to really come into shape, but things are going more quickly now. And so the second book then takes place there at the clan's settlement in the sort of 2 months between when they return from the winter and when she undergoes her initiation and is recognized as having become a young woman. And that's a fraught time as well. And then the third book will finish the story arc, if you will.
Mm-hmm. You compare the non-fictional historical writing that you did as an academic with the creative writing that you're actually doing now. Do you enjoy one more than the other, or is one easier than the other, or?
Yes, I have to say, I always liked to write as an academic. This is way more fun.
You don't have as many constraints.
You don't have as many constraints. And what brought me to history as a profession were the stories. As a little girl growing up, it was the stories, and they happened to be stories that were set historically that I really loved. And so I thought to write those stories, I should become a professional historian. And as happens with a lot of childhood passions, when you pursue that passion professionally, sometimes the original passion leaks away. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I had a Ph.D. in history and was teaching and writing, it sometimes was hard to remember what drew me to the field in the first place. And I did love to teach, but the way academia is set up in this day and age, it's hard to really be a good teacher and do all the research and writing and publication that's required. And I was off, my research was off in a little rabbit hole where I was presenting papers to colleagues who were also interested in these, very esoteric questions. And not that my research field was history of education, and there's all sorts of tremendously important research in that area that is impactful. But for me as an individual, getting up each day wondering, okay, what am I doing today to make the world a better place?
Yeah.
I felt like I was having more of an impact at the barn. Actually, at that point, I was combining my academic career with my time as a riding instructor, and it was so much more rewarding to see that smile on a little girl's face when she learned to post the trot, or the working with the woman who was my age, also coming back to her childhood passion for horses and reconnecting with that. That really was feeding my soul more than grading undergraduate essays.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when I decided to back away from academia entirely and just be with the horses. And then for a number of years, I really wasn't doing very much writing because of that. And like I say, when I went to the workshop at Linda's, I thought, well, maybe I'll start blogging about what I'm doing at the barn, and the way being with horses has put me on my own spiritual path, and how they've changed my approach to my life. And so the horses really had a huge impact on me personally. And then sort of magically the writing came back in. And so,
And
yes,
you actually enjoy it.
I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this much more.
So what are the themes from your academic work, from your academic work, from your academic writing, nonfiction, that show up in your trilogy, in She Who Rides Horses?
That's a great question. Let me preface my answer by saying I really do try to foreground the story itself. And so readers who really just want a story, that's the primary level. That said, I am a women's historian, and so and also very interested in depth psychology, Jungian archetypes, mythology. So at a deeper level, I'm investigating actually the rise of patriarchy, which can also be traced back to this time in this place, and how and why a patriarchal way of seeing the world and hierarchy and relationships, how that emerged, what role horses played in the spread of a patriarchal worldview. I'm looking at the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, and that very well known way of presenting stories, everything from the Odyssey to Star Wars, taking that and looking at critiquing it really from a feminist perspective. And what does a heroine's journey look like? And so my character is very much on a different kind of journey than the typical hero's journey. So those are some of the themes that I'm looking at, and then a lot from mythology and a pre-patriarchal worldview in terms of worship of the goddess, the role of the moon in women's lives. So there are a lot of levels there.
Now, when's the second book coming out, and is it going to have the same title, or what do you, or am I asking for?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly what the cover is going to look like in terms of the title, whether it'll be She Who Rides Horses, a Saga of the Ancient Steppe, and then a subtitle that indicates that it's the second book. The subtitles that I'm playing around with are either The Gathering or The Initiation, or something along those lines. It'll come to me. I'm hoping it'll be out toward the last sort of third of this year. I still have a chunk to write at the end. I don't want to, where it ends right now is I need to add a little bit more and then go through another big editing process, but it's in the works. And then I need to send the whole thing to my artist, my cover illustrator, who Diana Lancaster, who's an amazing artist. And when I first saw her work, she had done a particular piece of a young woman and a horse kind of in this embrace. And I'm like, oh my gosh, those are my characters. Not that one, actually. So I commissioned that cover from her, but the other picture is actually up on my website, and she had not done it as an illustration at my request. It was an image that had come to her, but I said that captures the feel of the book. It captures the connection between the girl and the horse. Will you do the cover art for the book, which she graciously agreed to do. And
so she's not a cover designer, she's an artist.
No, she is an artist. And so I had a sort of idea in mind for the cover that she did create of Naya and the red filly and the landscape. I don't have as clear an image of what I want the cover of the second book to look like. So I'm actually going to send her the draft, Diana, and let her draw out what she feels the right image might be for the cover. So that's another piece that needs to fall into place before the book comes out. So, but it'll be this year sometime.
Oh, okay, great. And now what you're envisioning, this is going to be a trilogy. So
that's right.
So, and
unless it keeps going,
as
I say, that this story, it's not my story. I have this responsibility that I feel to get the story out there, because I do feel in exploring the choices that we as humans made when we domesticated horses 6,000 years ago, we're actually kind of at another choice point in our contemporary world, and the type of consciousness we have around our relationship with nature and our responsibility for the planet, and the horses have kind of stuck with us through that whole adventure. And they have quite a bit to teach us even still today. And so my question as a historian is like, well, how did this relationship develop in the first place? And then what do the horses have to teach us today? And so my contribution to that current conversation is to get these books out there and this story. So I do feel this responsibility to get the story out there. And right now it's 3 books, but maybe it'll keep going. I don't know.
But maybe the story will continue.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much for stopping by today for Authors on iTours. And your tour starts on May 1st. And I believe we do have a review for She Who Rides Horses with Authors on iTours. And this is an added thing. So we're going to be looking forward to learning all about She Who Rides Horses. And thank you very much for stopping by today. Where can people find more about you and She Who Rides Horses and the upcoming books?
So my website is sarahvbarnes.com. And I'm on Facebook on She Who Rides Horses. So those, I don't have a big presence on other social media other than Facebook. And then my website stays fairly up to date. So those are the 2 best places to find me.
Okay. All right. And we'll be sure to look for you there. Okay.
Great.
Right.
And thanks again.
It
was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
And that concludes this episode of Authors on iTours. If you enjoyed this episode, then do give us a like and a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe so that you can receive notifications for upcoming episodes of Authors on iTours. In the meantime, happy reading!